Welcome back, everyone. So we changed a bit in our setup. I'll be the only MC for this session, but then I'll hand over to a next set of MCs to take over for me. And before we get started, with another, first of today, where I have the next speaker sitting next to me. So that's fun. I want to talk about Learn TV a little bit. We have a 24/7, always-on channel on Learn TV. That's a Microsoft thing, where you can get your technical content from. So you can check in there any time of the day and watch wonderful videos that have been curated for you. Or like today, we've been doing a takeover of Learn TV, so you could follow all of the sessions on Learn TV from this track only. And then tomorrow there's another conference going on Learn TV, another takeover, and the day after another conference. So you can just continue on that sort of conference streak for the next couple of days. So next up is Esther Barthel. You're a solution architect at Cognition, right? And you're an MVP and a Citrix technology professional.
Oh yeah, I gather a lot of titles.
Like boarding titles.
Yes, goodies and titles. That's my thing.
Yeah, that's. I've seen that like some of our other MCs have been handing out a couple of stickers here. So
I've been.
I saw you were eyeing my stash here, but it's mine. It's definitely mine. So you're going to give us a little intro in your automation journey and your start with DevOps.
Yes. So. I'll do the intro when I run over to the section where we are recording my session. But yeah, I started playing around with Azure and Azure Automation because I love to automate whatever Windows and Citrix deployment that I can get my hands on. And I thought it would be nice to share that experience, share that journey, so to speak, with all the others.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody watching can get started with their automation journey.
Oh yeah, it's step by step. So don't expect like total freaking out demos, but it is just me exploring Azure and the possibilities.
Yes, and a lot of hands-on exercises. I'm hoping for that. So while Esther walks to the stage, because there's some mobility, and
challenges. I'll just go over there. So see you soon.
Absolutely. Don't trip over the wires. Please don't trip over the wires. That will happen to me at least. So, and we can see her actually arriving. This is hilarious. So we're in the same studio, and this has been a treat really to be able to be in this studio these days. So while Esther adjusts, I just want to remind everyone that we have a code of conduct for this event.
Yes.
You can find the code of conduct on our website, Azure.Community. The summary of it is, let's all be delightful to one another. If you do notice any unsavory behavior, you can always reach out to me or to Henk Boelman, and both of our contact details are up on the website. And if Esther is ready,
yes,
let's get started.
So, welcome to my Azure Automation Fun. As I mentioned before, it's going to be like a step-by-step walkthrough, taking you on my journey in exploring Azure and all the automation fun that it offers. First of all, small introduction about me for those of you who do not already know me, as I've been active in the community for quite some years. I've been working in technical consulting for over 20 years now, mostly focused on end user computing, and started my own company a couple of years ago. Mostly focused on design, implementation, troubleshooting. And as we already talked about in the introduction, I'm involved in quite some community programs like the Citrix Technology Professionals, Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals. And I also am one of the leaders of the Citrix User Group Community Women in Tech Mentorship Program, where we offer one-on-one mentoring to make sure that our Women in Tech network grows and we are allowed and even have the men join in to sponsor women to become more visible within the community. And for the purpose of this presentation, basically I've been diving into DevOps and automation for the last couple of years. As I said, automating Windows and Citrix deployments, focusing on REST APIs, JSON, and my favorite scripting language, PowerShell. So for this session, I wanted to dive into Azure Infrastructure as a Service, ARM templates, Azure Automation, and Azure DevOps. So let's get started with Azure Infrastructure as a Service. Because I come from an infrastructure background, that for me was the most logical step to get acquainted with Azure and the Azure services. So for this presentation, the focus is mostly on servers and storage, networking, and, well, data center. Physical building is kind of the part that I love Microsoft to run. So focusing on network, you have to realize that Azure is very object-oriented. So every resource is an object in itself that you can configure and work with and have actions performed upon. And to make that a little bit more clear, if we're looking at network, it's not just your software-defined network that we're talking about within Azure, but it's also the network interface that you can specify settings on. It's a public IP address that is an object on its own that you can perform actions on. Same with the security groups. And if we're looking at compute, it's mostly the focus on the different families or series that you can select that offers predefined configurations for CPU, RAM, and even GPU. And luckily, storage, at least that's not my focus of expertise, is mostly focused on storage accounts, which makes it pretty comprehensible for me as well. So my first Azure experience was a simple question: let's deploy a virtual machine within Azure. So I started going to the marketplace, select the fact that I wanted to create a virtual machine, and then I was presented with basically a fill-out form where Microsoft asked me quite some information to provide. For this demo purposes, I decided to make it a bit more challenging for myself, and I also looked into Windows Virtual Desktop, especially now yesterday the GA is announced for the spring release. So looking at deploying a Windows Virtual Desktop provisioning host pool, I see lights moving on the side, so I apologize for laughing. I love being in the spotlight. So back to Windows Virtual Desktop. In this case, in my demos, I wanted to provision a host pool, which basically is a collection of session hosts that host a user session, talking about end user computing. So if we're talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, it's basically the same as deploying virtual machines within Azure. So it's a lot focused on getting all the information from you to make sure that you get that virtual machine, or in this case, your host pool, configured in the right settings, or with the right settings. So you have to go through quite some tabs and information that you need to provide. First of all, on some basics, like naming your host pool, general stuff, but then also focusing on your virtual machines itself, on the host pool, even on the Windows Virtual Desktop service that is running in the backend, to make sure that you can basically get that provisioned service that you want. So finally, after answering all these questions, you get to this great review and create screen that has a built-in validation to make sure that you're not basically providing the wrong information for your Azure Resource Manager to deploy this service. And then you can finally hit create and get the stuff that you want. So I did realize that this is quite some manual actions, and you have to provide quite some information that probably can be pre-configured in a smarter way. So my first journey basically in Azure Automation was to dive into the Azure Resource Manager templates that you can use and that you can create to automate that deployment phase within Azure. If we're looking at the definition that Microsoft gives for ARM templates, you'll notice that it's mostly focused on JSON and expressions. And if we're talking about JSON, I figured it would be smart to at least walk you through some of the syntax rules that apply for JavaScript object notation. First rule is that all data within your JSON configuration is a name value pair separated by a colon. Next rule to remember is that all data, those name value pairs, are separated by commas. We're using curly braces to specify objects within JSON. And those basically are, if we're talking about Azure, the Azure resources. And in case we want to work with arrays, we have to make sure that they are placed within square brackets. And of course, it wouldn't be a lot of fun if we couldn't just mix and match all, so you do have the option to use nested arrays within JSON. So this is just a quick rundown to go over well, the basic syntax. And this will allow us to more easily understand or read the ARM templates that we are going to build. Because each ARM template consists of predefined sections, so to speak. First of all, there is schema, which basically is a link to the schema file for your JSON template. Next up is content version, which allows you to apply versioning to your template files. So that's for your own use and formatting. Parameters, those are input values for your ARM template. Variables are used within your template to make sure that you can have concatenations of information strings, that you can have shorter paths linking to Azure resource objects, all kinds of smart moves to make your templates more interactive. Next up is functions, and I have to admit I didn't focus too much on functions in the beginning. I figured that would be like more the advanced class. So functions basically allows you to use basic functions within your ARM template. And resources is the main part because those are the Azure resources that we want to deploy. And in case you want to have some output, you can also specify that within your ARM template. And in my case, I usually make sure that the virtual machine name that I'm deploying is one of the informations that I put in output to make sure that I don't forget which machines I deployed with my template. So this is a basic template with no specified content yet, as Microsoft offers. And I have to admit, at first I felt a bit scared, so to speak, to get started, because it is kind of overwhelming to get already this much information and knowing that this doesn't deploy any resources yet. So I kind of got worried that it was going to be like a long journey to master ARM templates. The cool part is that Microsoft offers a lot of quick start guides to help you get started, as the guide implies, to help you get started with Azure Resource Manager template. And basically, the quick start guide walks you through step by step on all the actions you have to perform. So it starts basically by telling you that you have to go within the Azure portal to within the menu to create a resource, find that resource that you want to deploy within the Azure Marketplace. Once again, in my case, it's Windows Virtual Desktop, and then go through all those fill-out forms, as I showed you in the first slides. But instead of hitting that create button and doing the same process over and over, you have to be aware that there's a small download link in the right corner that allows you to basically download a template based on all the information that you put in those fill out forms. So it directs you to a download page that not only allows you to download the ARM template itself, but also a parameters file that has all that information from the fill out form in that template file that already specifies the information as parameters. So you can simply hit that download button and get your ARM template. And the cool part is that you now have a pre-configured ARM template that is ready to use. And it also allows you to make some customizations wherever you feel they are needed. For instance, to add an additional network interface card and network settings. Or to specify a public IP address in case you need one. So your ARM template already has all the sections filled out. Parameters, variables, functions, resources, and even output in this case. Because this template is already pre-configured to at least return those session host objects that are created with this process. Once again, for those of you who really want to dive into ARM templates and syntax and all the resources that you can deploy with them, there is this awesome ARM template reference guide on Microsoft documentations that will give you all the detailed information. As I said, for instance, if you want to add a public IP address or deploy a public IP address. So it shows you the template formatting, the JSON itself, but it also gives you detailed information on all the property values that you can specify within your template. Like basic stuff, name, the properties itself of your public IP address, for instance, whether or not it's a static or dynamic IP address, and IP address itself. So this already allows you to basically have a cool reference guide to make your own customizations or experiment with your customizations. As I did in my case, this is just an example of adding that public IP information within my ARM template. Name, type, properties once again, and the public IP address settings. Another cool resource to check out is the ARM template repo, so to speak, because it is a full repository with over 800 templates already pre-configured and ready for you to use for all kinds of different situations or resources or sets of resources that you want to deploy. So feel free to check it out and to search for those templates and those resources that you want to deploy, because chances are there's already a template available for you. And if we're talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, there's also a great GitHub repository that holds specific templates for WVD deployments. So I just wanted to make sure that there's a shout out to that section as well. Back to templates. So now that I have my first customized ARM template, I wanted to figure out what the best way is to start experimenting or checking whether or not it deploys correctly. And the easiest way to do that is to go within your Azure portal to the template section, because that gives you a full library, so to speak, or a repository where you can upload and import your own ARM templates, edit them, keep them up to date, and even use the deploy button to simply deploy or start your ARM deployment based on that template. And of course, you can already pre-fill your template with a lot of information by specifying default values within your template. So that already gives you a lot of filled out fields in your form. But in my case, I didn't want to have sensitive information like secrets, keys, subscription ID information within the template, because it is obviously mostly stored in clear text. So I still need to provide some manual data to make sure that I can deploy this template. But once I have done that and I've accepted the agreement, I can hit the purchase button and my deployment is getting started. And you can follow all the steps of your deployment within the overview. And as you can see, I quickly fast forwarded through the deployment. One of the steps within my template is a customized script to add the machine to the Active Directory. And fast forwarding it once more, because I don't like to have you wait with me for like 8 minutes. The deployment is all done, and you can still see each and every step and even zoom in on details of each and every deployment step. Pretty cool, I figured. Of course, I'm one of those persons that has to visually get confirmation or whether or not my deployment is successful. So I had to make sure that I logged on to the WVD portal and am able to start my session. So as you can see, that's very successful. My session is started, first time log on, and I get my desktop. But I still figured that is kind of not a full automated deployment yet, because I'm still manually entering information or data through the Azure portal. So I figured there had to be a better way. And what better way is there than using PowerShell scripts to automate your deployments? So I was thrilled to notice that there's a whole Azure PowerShell module that allows you to basically automate whatever resource actions you want to perform within Azure. And of course, with PowerShell, it's easy to install. So you just use the install module commandlet, give the AZ name because that's the name of the module, and easy as that, the module is installed on your machine. As you can see, you get your AZ module. This is just a quick reminder because I ran into some errors that told me that it couldn't find the module within the gallery. And it turned out it wasn't looking at the right galleries because I had multiple gallery resources. If you prefix your command with PowerShell get, you'll make sure that it looks in the Microsoft PowerShell gallery. And with the AZ module, basically you get a lot of sub-modules focusing on all the different resource services that Azure offers. And of course, it wouldn't be Microsoft if there wasn't a cool reference guide that allows you to deep dive into each commandlet and know which parameters you can specify and what the actions are that you can perform with them. So let's get started with that Azure module. If you look at the quick start guides from Microsoft, it basically tells you to use the Login-AzAccount commandlet. And this is of course a very cool commandlet to get you authenticated against Azure and to start your Azure session. But it's a kind of an interactive logon. So it gives a pop-up and asks you to provide your credentials manually, which isn't, of course, true automated actions in my book. So the good news is that within Azure, for automation purposes, we can use an Azure AD Service Principal account. And that's basically an app registration within your Azure AD that allows you to connect in a non-interactive way with Azure and create your session. To do that, you need to register your application or your app, so to speak. And then make sure that you note down the application ID and the director or your tenant ID, because those two pieces of information are required to create your session. And the other thing that you need to do is create a secret for your app ID. And make sure that you note that secret as well, because once you leave that screen and go back to your secret information, it is limited and it's starred, so you cannot get the full information back. So either create a new secret or make sure that you store it in a secure place like a key vault. Going back to my first PowerShell script. So first of all, I'm using now the Connect-AzAccount commandlet to create a credential for my service principal, and then use that in the Connect-AzAccount, specifying that I'm using a service principal to make sure that Azure understands that I want to have a non-interactive start of my session. And easy as that, I have now a session created to Azure, and I can use each and every AZ commandlet to get started and to automate my Azure deployments. So to automate an ARM template-based deployment, you can use the new AZ Resource Group Deployment commandlet. In my case, I didn't want to specify the parameters input file, so to speak, but I decided to build a custom template object because that allows me to dynamically add information or dynamically retrieve information from my Azure subscription and make that the input for my automated actions. So in this case, I'm using the commandlet to start my ARM template deployment based on the ARM template that I specify and the object template parameters. Like I said, I love to build in some extra steps. So in this case, I made sure that my script gives me back some feedback on all the steps that I performed in it. Like I said, create a session to Azure. We talked about that previously. Making sure that I have a secure password for my credentials. Creating that parameter object. Then deploying my ARM templates, which is a WVD host pool, and finally making sure that I check if that resource is actually created. This felt like I finally got my Azure automation up and running. But to be honest, this still requires an administrative machine that runs my PowerShell. In fact, it basically uses an internet connection to Azure to run that. So I figured, to challenge myself, there had to be a smarter way to maybe even use services within Azure itself to do my automation. And of course, it wouldn't be Azure if there wasn't a service for it. So I discovered Azure Automation. That basically allows me to import PowerShell scripts and create them as PowerShell RunBooks, which allows me to basically rule Azure, so to speak, through the services itself. So I can import and create and edit runbooks based on PowerShell scripts, but I can also pre-configure my Azure Automation environment by already importing those PowerShell modules that I need. So those are already pre-installed, so to speak, and I can simply import them within my script. And the other cool part is that Azure Automation also basically gives me a secured vault or location to store credentials and variables that might contain sensitive information. So for me, that means I do no longer need a CSV file with clear text information stored in it. And do note that this is not a try this at home comment. This is not best practice, so please do not try this at home. This was just for demo purposes to make my scripts run smoothly without exploiting all that sensitive information. Going back to Azure Automation. So once you have that runbook import it, edit it, and have it the way you want it, you can simply select that runbook and hit start. And if you start a runbook, it will ask you probably, if you specify those, for parameters. And mind you, these are not, in my case, the ARM template parameters that I talked about earlier, but these are parameters for my runbook. And within Azure Automation, you have two separate environments that you can choose to run that runbook on. So you can run it on Azure itself, which means Azure will spin up an agent and run your PowerShell script for you. Or you can use a predefined hybrid worker that you can control and manage yourself. So in case you need additional files or information that you do not want to store within Azure, but you want to have on your own machine or network share, feel free to use that hybrid worker scenario. But in my case, I wanted to make sure that it was as serverless as possible. So I choose to run the runbooks within the Azure environment itself. So once I've made that selection, I can just hit OK, and then the runbook is started. And zooming in on the runbook, I wanted to make sure that you understood that I did make some small modification in addition to that original PowerShell script that I used. First of all, because I was very curious on making the runbook more dynamic, I wanted to make sure that I could specify the name for my host pool as a parameter. So that's like normal declaration of parameters within PowerShell. And that will make sure that the runbook asks for those parameter input once you start it. The other section, as I mentioned, refers to the Azure Automation variables and Azure Automation credentials that are available within Azure Automation. And this allows me to basically have that script pull down that information or read that information from a secured vault location instead of having that in clear text within the script itself. Once again, creating the service principal credentials to start my session, then deploy the WVD host pool, and in the end, run that section that checks if all the resources were created correctly. And of course, a small demo video to walk you through the process. Starting my runbook, selecting Azure, and once you start your runbook, the input that it receives is shown in the Input tab, but you can also check the console output of your script on the Output tab. And please make sure that you refresh it every now and then because it doesn't have an auto refresh function in it. As you can see, it's going through the different steps, and knowing myself, I'll probably fast forward through the different steps to make sure that we're not waiting, staring at a screen, hoping that it gives us more information. In this case, it's already at the point where it's deploying my ARM resources or based on that template. And I'm making sure, once again, within Azure that I double check if the deployment actually started. Fast forwarding through all the different steps of my ARM template. Becoming even more impatient with a pre-recorded video. But in the end, my deployment is successful. And if I go back to my runbook and my output, I'll notice that the status changed from running to completed, which is a good thing. And within the output, I can now see that it gives the output of the ARM template, but also did run the follow-up actions within PowerShell to check if the resources were created correctly within Azure. But Azure Automation, I know it can connect to a GitHub repository as well. So it does offer you options to basically do versioning, to follow best practices from a DevOps perspective. But it kind of felt like it wasn't living up to its full potential, because especially if we're talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, I do not only want to deploy resources through my Azure environment, but I also want to do some additional actions like image management, making sure that I build my custom image before I do my ARM deployment, to make sure that I always have the latest and greatest up and running for my customers. So I decided to check out Azure DevOps because it felt like that would offer me a lot more options to build a fully automated build test pipeline, as it's called. But as you can see, or as you're noticing, with my infrastructure background, I still have a hard time comprehending all the different, more developer terms that are associated with Azure DevOps, like pipelines, like artifacts, releases, builds. Those are still terms that I need to understand and play with a lot. So one of the good things that I found was this blog post from Tom Hickling, who's a Windows Virtual Desktop Global Black Belt from Microsoft, who wrote this awesome blog on, from an infrastructure perspective, on how to use Azure DevOps for your infrastructure as code. So that was a great starting point for me to dive into Azure DevOps and see if I could basically get the same result with my ARM template from Azure DevOps. So if we're looking at Azure DevOps, you'll notice that it has all those different terms like pipelines, releases, and I decided to not focus directly from the beginning on the pipelines, which basically is to create a full build and to make sure that you predefine artifacts or results, so to speak, that you can reuse in your other pipeline builds. But I just wanted to basically have a release, just make sure that I do that ARM template deployment and make sure that I'm using the DevOps way to go, so to speak, or best practices. So zooming in on building a release pipeline, there's an easy built-in task to run an ARM template deployment. So all I had to do was make sure that I added that action to my first pipeline, and that allows me to basically specify the template parameters, and I can even override the defaults within my template with, in this case, even variables. So the cool thing about Azure DevOps is that it gives you this option to use variables from your own variable groups within your library. And if we're talking about pipeline variables, you need to be aware of the fact that there are basically like two types of variable groups. First of all, you can specify variables, a variable group and variables within Azure DevOps itself. And that also allows you to hide sensitive information, as you can see. But the other cool thing is that you can also link it to an Azure key vault. And that gives you an even more centralized management for your secrets and your keys and credentials, using yet another awesome Azure service. So I made sure that I also have a link to my key vault, because basically I'm not interested in what the actual content is of my variable. I just want to make sure that I use the right variables within my deployment. So going back to my release pipeline, starting a release means I create a new release. I can even add a description to it and then hit start, or create in this case. And this release doesn't have an automated validation process to it, so I have to manually start it. Zooming in on the pipeline, and as I said, it's not automatically deployed, so you still have to manually hit deployment in this case, and then hit deploy. And the cool part is you can keep track of process within Azure DevOps. So I do not actually have to switch to my Azure portal or my Azure environment to double check it. That's just me trying to stay in control of each and every process and understanding all the different actions that are going on. And as you can see, it's already at that stage where it's started the ARM template deployment. As I said, I like to stay in control and fully comprehend all the steps and all the background processes that are happening. So once again, I'm checking in my Azure portal if that deployment is actually started. Very relieved that it is working the way I intended. Switching back to Azure DevOps, fast forwarding to the point where it says that the deployment is successful. And basically, I have my WVD host pool deployed. Once again, double checking. And I even created like a small PowerShell script to check if the resources were actually created. So I guess this basically is me taking you on my small journey through all the different steps that I took and all the different challenges that I faced during my journey through Azure services. And I hope it does help you to realize that you can start with small steps, getting more familiar, feeling more familiar and confident with all the different services that are there and all the different ways that you can use to step by step build that automated deployment yourself. And before I switch over to the Q&A section, I wanted to make sure that I would help you on your way as well, sharing the experiences that I had. So I made sure that I have a GitHub repository for Azure Automation, and I'll make sure that I upload all the scripts that were used with the demos and all the videos and the presentation slides to make sure that you have a full set to get you started as well. And that you know how to contact me in case you have any additional questions after this presentation. So let me quickly run over to the couch and see if they are ready for throwing some questions at me.
Absolutely, and please don't run. You will just hurt yourself. And we'll have Susanne actually with us for a little second saying a couple of words about our interpreters before we get to the Q&A session. So you definitely did not need to run, but I appreciate that you're here. All right,
you were really fast, by the way.
Thank you, Susanne, for joining us as well.
Yeah, happy to be here. So thank you all for watching. Now you might wonder where the interpreters came from. Well, that was planned. They will be here interpreting.
Surprise.
Surprise. For about 11 sessions. And so, warm welcome to Oliver, Maya, and Leer. And well, they will be interpreting into International Sign Language. So
for us, yeah. That's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, that was my first experience too, having an interpreter. So I hope I wasn't speeding through the presentation and they could keep up with that.
Yeah. I read in the chat that Susanne is not audible, so maybe I don't know if you've unmuted yourself. It's the classic unmute.
Oh dear. Hi, I'm a rookie.
Oh no!
Also, all of this is
Like
normal. Like this, it just
Yes?
falls apart. I mean, we're not even halfway through and things fall apart.
Already. We have still like many hours to go.
It is an experience, I think.
Yes.
So
I think so too. So, well, because you were not able to hear me probably, say warm welcome to Oliver, Maya, and Leer. And they are our interpreters for 11 sessions on track 1. You can find out which sessions are being interpreted on the schedule by the hand
icon. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And now that Esther, I love it. Now that Esther has joined us with her cup of coffee, I'm guessing, or water,
My cool new goodies.
Yes, exactly. Like Susanna joined us, and she didn't come empty-handed, so she brought a lot of stickers and other kinds of swag. And I feel like we'll have a lot of people asking in the chat where those stickers come from. I bet Susanna can answer that later on when she has a chance. We hope that you share the links to the GitHub repo in the chat when you get a chance to.
I'll definitely do that.
Climb behind your laptop again. And there were 2 questions actually, or there were more questions so you should definitely jump into the chat and answer those. But I think one that came back a couple of times is, have you tried using GitHub Actions as well? And what was your experience?
Well, this is the part where I have to fess up that I still feel like a GitHub noob. So I still struggle with pull requests and all the things.
We can do a little sesh later on.
Oh, I would love that, because I keep asking people to help me out because basically, coming from an infrastructure background, I'm the kind of girl that still basically put like dates in all my files, my scripts. That was my kind of versioning.
Yes. Final, really final, definite. Yes.
So I have like folders and folders. I feel like a digital hoarder if it comes to my scripts. So I still need to feel more confident that GitHub will do the versioning for me. So GitHub Actions sounds like one step too far for me just yet.
Baby steps.
Yes, baby steps, going back. So I'm just happy that I figured out Azure DevOps. And I can now confidently say that I built a release pipeline. Still have no clue if I did it correctly or not. But yeah, that's my summer studying goal, to understand Azure DevOps. So definitely check out GitHub Actions as well and get back to you on my experiences.
Awesome. So maybe for the next virtual Azure Community Day, we can have you back on again and you can share part 2 of the story.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would love to do that.
Yeah, that's a deal then.
All right.
It's being recorded.
It's recorded, so it's real.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have a personal question.
Okay.
Is there a thing like too much automation?
No. No.
What a surprise.
Well, if you ask me, of course, the question is no, because I just love being in control and a lot of the consulting that I do is all about being in your head and just advising customers on how to do implementations and create stuff, but I'm not actually creating anymore. So doing this whole automation and DevOps like hobby projects just gives me the satisfaction that I can immediately see the results of what I'm creating. And it's a thrill to see that whatever I picture in my head as an automated process actually happens. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I keep checking and double checking if it's actually doing the deployment, because I need to grow confident in automation. Yeah. But if you asked, for instance, my girlfriend, she would say, yeah, there definitely is too much automation.
Well, I feel like maybe it's just it's like preaching to the choir. Didn't you plan the whole moving houses on DevOps as well?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes. I used Azure DevOps for planning my moving, and it worked quite well. But my family was quite happy when we stopped using it. So,
I can't imagine why.
Well, maybe.
Did you do?
Okay, well, I'll tell my girlfriend that there definitely is a next level to what I'm doing, because she just gets confused with all the home automation that I try to do. Because now she is discovering that the light switches are not working anymore, and there's like a remote control or an app that has scheduled times, leaving her in the dark before, basically because she doesn't want to have Google Home or Alexa in the house listening in, so to speak. So yeah, I have to program it all. So I leave her in the dark every now and then.
It feels like your girlfriend is sort of my soul sister, and like.
I think we can, like my girlfriend is like the same when sometimes at 11 o'clock for a little while, then at 11 the lights went out and on again and out again and then on again.
Oh, like last round in the cafe.
It's much weird.
That's nice.
She was like, "What's
You can
happening?"
leave now.
And before I leave on a trip or something, then I'm not allowed, a few weeks in advance, there's a change freeze. So I'm not allowed to do any changes.
Or updates, or.
Yes, so this is when you know you hit rock bottom.
Okay, so one quick note, Jose, ignore whatever she said just previously, because there are no changes and change freezes in our home. Thank you very much.
I can just imagine both of you doing like stand-ups in the morning to go through like all the work items. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah.
I think we're going out for a little break, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes with Sjoukje, who is, after her session, also going to be one of the MCs. So this is going to be a fun, interactive bit. And she'll be joining us in the studio as well. So see you back here in a couple of minutes. Thank you, Esther.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Have fun.